Can everyone hear me?
There we go.
Oh,
I've got you now.
Much better.
just, just a
Continue.
little, just a little technical difficulties, huh? So, going back to where we were, where did chronic wasting disease come from, or do you guys want me to go ahead and start back here a little ways to
Yeah,
where?
Dallas, back plumb up to the beginning because you were pretty terrible all the way through as far as your audio goes.
Great. So my name is Dallas Barber, and I'm our big game biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. And I just kind of wanted to go over a brief history of chronic wasting disease as it pertains to us in Oklahoma, and why we have implemented a new regulation for carcass import and transport. Just a background, what is chronic wasting disease? This is a contagious neurological disease that impacts the Cervidae family, which are deer, elk, moose, and caribou, and results in degeneration of brain tissue, emaciation, abnormal behavior, and ultimately, and 100% of the time, death. This is a member of the TSE family, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathy family of diseases. Transmissible meaning it can be passed from animal to animal. Spongiform meaning that it causes holes, referring to the holes that it causes in the brain. And encephalopathy means anything that impacts the brain. It's related to scrapie in sheep, related to BSE or mad cow in cattle. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that one. And the human form is found in Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. So what causes CWD? This is not a virus or a bacteria. The agent is actually called a prion. And this is an abnormal form of a cellular protein. It's highly concentrated in the central nervous system, which is one of the main reasons why some of those exceptions for transporting carcasses into the state are the way they are, is that these prions are highly concentrated in that central nervous system. Just a brief explanation, every animal has prion proteins in their body. It's just when you develop in this case, chronic wasting disease, that prion misfolds, and it convinces other prion proteins that they too should misfold. So that's kind of how it spreads throughout the body and develops. So where is chronic wasting disease in the country? This is the most up-to-date map from the USGS, U.S. Geological Services up in Wisconsin. All of the gray counties that you can see across the United States are CWD counties as far as free-range deer in those counties that are positive for chronic wasting disease. The yellow dots are going to be CWD in captive facilities, so high fence breeding facilities that have been depopulated. And then those red dots are captive facilities positive for chronic wasting disease that have yet to be depopulated or are on some sort of herd plan from the USDA. So just to take a little closer look in with some of our neighbors, here is Arkansas's map. They've got positives right up against our border there in Benton, Washington, Sebastian County, which would border up against our northeast portion of the state. Texas has got a couple areas that are positive for chronic wasting disease, but the one you should pay attention to would be this Dalhart area that's up there in the very northern point of the Texas Panhandle, pretty much just south of Boise City, Oklahoma. This is Kansas's map. Their nearest case is right there, that green star. That was a captive elk facility that was depopulated. Missouri, again, bumping right up against us there in their southwest corner. Positives in New Mexico as well as Colorado. So, where in the world did this come from? It's a really hard thing to trace all the way back, but it was first recognized and kind of written about in the 60s in Colorado. Scrapie, like I had mentioned, is a TSE of sheep, and it's been around since the late 40s. So in the world of virology and disease study, this is something that's relatively new compared to a lot of other issues. How does this spread? Again, these are things that we take into consideration, especially when it came to this regulation. infectious prions, when the animal's alive, can be passed in feces, urine, and saliva. Obviously, lateral transmission is an issue, being animal to animal. Movement of animals, so live or dead, movement of animals is a major issue, both natural and human assisted. Environmental transmission, so congregation sites. There's been some studies that are showing that baiting sites, things like those where animals are tightly congregated, can lead to the ground actually becoming contaminated, and those prions can bind to soil and can be picked up that way. So some of the symptoms that we're looking at, and one disclaimer here that I do want to say to everybody is that although all of these are symptoms of chronic wasting disease, they're also symptoms of a lot of other things that we see in our deer, like brain abscesses, EHD, blue tongue, things like that can all show similar symptoms here. But I'll just go through kind of this list here. Clinical emaciation. So emaciation is just a fancy biology word for looking very skinny, underweight, malnourished, excessive drinking and urination. So we'll see behavioral changes, decreased interactions with other animals. Typically, those animals all tend to be off alone by themselves, hanging their heads, blank facial expressions, standing in an A-frame stance, so with their head down and their legs spread apart, front legs spread apart, excessive drooling. So all of these symptoms are considered late stage CWD symptoms and are usually only visible in adult animals, because with this disease, there's a fairly long incubation period of 18 months to 2 years, basically meaning that you can look at a deer that appears perfectly healthy, and that deer can be positive for chronic wasting disease. They've just not reached a symptomatic stage of that disease yet. So it can make it very, very difficult just to ID by the naked eye. Here's a couple picture examples of both of those. You can see on the left, here's a classic picture of that A-frame stance in an elk, head hanging, feet spread apart and drooling. Also, you can see some of that pelvic girdle there starting to show itself. The other one here is actually a picture that I received from my counterpart in Arkansas. Although this is a young buck and he does appear a little bit thin, otherwise, other than being obviously a roadkill deer, he appears pretty healthy. But that deer actually tested positive for chronic wasting disease. How do we detect chronic wasting disease? So you said you can't see it just by looking at them. Clinical signs are not conclusive, and unfortunately, science has not gotten us to a point where there's a practical live animal test. So all of the testing that's done on animals is actually an animal that's either been hunter harvested, road killed, things of that nature. We will take lab samples for a deer. We're looking at the lymph nodes, the retropharyngeal lymph nodes. So these are a pair of lymph nodes that sit just on either side of the trachea, on up towards the brain, and that is the preferred tissue for testing. And they're running some tests called ELISA tests and immunohistochemistry tests. Both of those are kind of the gold standard for detection. So why do we care? CWD poses a serious problem for wildlife managers across the country. There are possible human health risks. Again, like I said, with this being such a new disease, we still don't really know if this disease can bridge the species barrier. So with that, you're seeing a reduction in hunters and ultimately funding for state agencies to put forth effort to conserve wildlife habitat and populations. Impacts of CWD population levels are starting to show themselves in longer tenured states like Colorado or Wyoming, where they're seeing massive population reductions and rates of up to 35 to 50% positive rates in some areas. This is a very, very slow moving disease. It's not something that just comes through in a season and makes these impacts. It's something that kind of creeps and crawls along through the population, which can make it very difficult to manage. Surveillance programs are extremely expensive. draws funding from other management product or projects. For example, Arkansas Game and Fish Commission has spent over $4 million testing and combating this disease since 2017. So you'd seen on the nationwide map that I posted up, CWD is not something new to Oklahoma. Fortunately, we have not found any CWD positive animals in our free range deer or elk herds in Oklahoma. We've had one positive elk facility in northern Oklahoma County in 1999, and we've also had one positive elk facility in Lincoln County in 2019. And since that case in 1999, we have tested over 12,000 animals for chronic wasting disease, 12,000 native wild deer and elk, and have yet to have a positive. So how did we accomplish that? Extensive sampling was done around each facility. That also includes some of our herd health evaluations that we do on an annual basis. Sick deer calls have all kind of added up to that total. No positives have resulted from any of that sampling. So another thing we've done is we have developed a strategic management plan for chronic wasting disease. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just kind of touch on what the overlying theme is for each one of these steps. It's going to be science-based, preventative, diagnostic, protective, analytical, investigative, and educational. And that's where this step two, that's where this regulation comes from. Is step two is prevention of further incidents of CWD in free range and captive cervids in Oklahoma. So Skylar already read the entire new regulation out here. So I guess we can go over that here shortly as we all kind of talk together, but education is critical. So you guys coming here today and listening to what we have to say is one step in that, on educating our stakeholders that it's critical to the management and preventing the spread of chronic wasting disease. So I will go ahead and kick it back to you guys.
Wade, go ahead, and everybody who's on this call right now, our Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement, Wade Farrar, is now going to touch on the legality background of this. So what this rule actually means to you as a hunter when you are hunting in Oklahoma or you're traveling abroad and harvesting cervidae. Take it away, Wade.
I see no other way to do this except for to just go through this law again. If you guys have a hunting regulation or access to the virtual regs, it's written word for word in the regulations as the same as it is in Title 800. So we're just going to go through this word for word, and Dallas can chime in here when we get to the actual exceptions to this rule and kind of help me out with definitions of certain things. So, the rule says no person shall import, transport, or possess any cervid carcass or part of a cervid carcass from outside the boundaries of Oklahoma. It doesn't get much simpler than that. So if you have a cervid part or a cervid carcass, the entire animal that came from the outside of the state of Oklahoma, and we're saying a carcass is a dead animal, you cannot bring that thing into the state of Oklahoma except for the next part of the rule says the following items are the only exceptions. So the only exceptions are the ones, the five listed here. So the first one is one I'm going to ask for a definition, I guess, from Dallas, but it's antlers or antlers attached to a clean skull plate or clean skull. So antlers are antlers. Those have been detached from the skull plate, so it's just a horn, basically, what people will call it. Antlers attached to a clean skull plate is the skull, the skull cap, which has been detached from the skull. Like if we're going to do just a wall mount of just the horns, then that's pretty easy to clean. You clean the hair and hide off of it, and the brain's going to fall out of it. So the question comes on is, what is a clean skull? It says clean skulls, all tissue removed. So Dallas, do you want to explain what we consider a clean skull?
Yeah. So all tissue removed, tissue is defined as pretty much anything that's not bone. So if you're going to bring a skull, a whole skull, as far as wanting to do a European mount or anything, you know, some of the things that I recommend would be to either just boil that skull out in the state that you've harvested that deer in. You can also take a power washer and power wash what's left after you have skinned that animal off. That includes, you know, the brain cavity, all of the eye socket material, membranes. And again, this is just a preventative measure because those prions that cause this disease are concentrated highly in that central nervous system. So yeah, that's kind of the explanation that we have to give for it.
All right, so moving on, the second exception says animal quarters containing no spinal materials. So animal quarters are the hind quarters, front quarters. You remove those from the animal at the hip socket. There's no spinal material that can be in that quarter. And then it says, or meat with all parts of the spinal column removed. So back straps, tenderloins, if you want to get rib meat, all that's going to be good to go, but you have to leave the spinal cord and all spinal materials behind. Anything you want to add there, Dallas?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Cleaned teeth. The reason that's there is because people like to take their, the elk ivories, come home and use those for jewelry, those kinds of things. If the teeth are in the skull, the same rules that apply to a skull are going to apply to the teeth. The teeth have to be clean and free of all tissue and dirt, saliva, that kind of thing. Finished taxidermy products. So if you shoot your elk in Colorado and you have it taxidermied there, you can bring it back. They can ship it to you, however that works. And then hides or tan products. So you can remove the hide from the animal completely from the carcass. You can bring that hide back. And obviously, if it's been through the complete taxidermy process to be a finished tanned hide, then that would be okay as well. So that's about all I have to say about the law. We want to open it up for questions. Skylar, was there something else you wanted to add?
No, if anybody who's in this course right now, if you have any questions, we'll leave this forum open for the next 15 minutes to do a Q&A. So if you have your questions, please type them into the chat bar and we'll answer them. And if we get past 15 minutes and there's no more questions, we will finish this session. And like I said at the beginning, this course will be available on our website within 48 hours. So Jared asked, I hunt on family land in Kansas. Cleaning a skull will take the better part of half a day or a day, skinning, boiling, etc. So I guess no more trying to get a buck on my last day of hunting, ?
So this is something that, is not new to a lot of other states. Plenty of our neighboring states have got very similar laws and regulations that apply there. My recommendation to you would be to either add another day to your trip. I know that's not always a possibility, but just planning for that to happen, of giving yourself some time to abide by these regulations, to bring that back in, or find a local taxidermist in Kansas to boil that head for you, and you can either have them ship it to you or come back up and pick it up.
The other option there is to, you remove the skin, which does not take half a day, especially after you've done it a couple times, and run that thing by the car wash on your way home and just follow the direction that Dallas gave earlier. Just knock all that tissue off of it with the car wash.
With emphasis on that brain stem and the brain cavity, as well as all the eyes.
Do we need to have someone verify it out of state if we boil it ourselves and go by the car wash?
Are you talking to me? She's on the phone. Oh, because I'm going.
Oh.
Amanda,
you're
asking, do you need to have somebody in that state verify?
Yes. So we actually got letters from the state of Wyoming, and it sounds voluntary to give. They are asking for our samples, but it sounds voluntary. But what I'm asking is, we were planning to try and, take that extra day and boil and run by a car wash and all of that. But do we need to verify, like have somebody verify in case there is some extra skin left, or because it's not going to be an official taxidermist doing it for us. We were just going to do it ourselves. Do we need to contact a game warden out there or have somebody look at those before we try and haul them back into the state? Or do you feel like if we do the boiling and the car wash that we are pretty good?
That's most likely going to take care of it if you make a reasonable effort.
Okay.
I don't think checking with a game warden in that state is going to help. You obviously have plenty of game wardens that you can contact in Oklahoma and send pictures to. That same thing is feasible for any hunter that's out of state. They have a local game warden. If you don't know your local game warden, get his number and find him, and you get to know him. But we've got cell phones, we get text messages, and we have emails. We can more than welcome to look at those pictures and say, yeah, that's good enough, or no, it's not.
One thing you might touch on, Wade, that we discussed pre-meeting is traveling for hunters. So we talked about, for instance, if you were to shoot an elk in the panhandle of Oklahoma, but you're in the state of Oklahoma and you are an Oklahoma hunter, these rules are talking about importation into the state and does not necessarily apply to animals that are killed in the state of Oklahoma. So could you address that for our hunters of what this really means as far as bringing the animal back into the state?
So if I understood that right, you're asking if I shoot a deer here in the panhandle and I leave the state and come back, like if I'm in Boise City and I come back via Texas back to Oklahoma City?
Correct.
Yeah, I guess as soon as you leave the state with it, you're going to be legal as far as Oklahoma goes, because this law deals only with import. It does not say anything about export of the cervids here in Oklahoma. But I do believe Texas and I think all the surrounding states have laws that do pertain to that you cannot bring, that you can't import something from another state. So if you take that thing into Texas, now you've violated Texas law, and now you're in Texas, and now you're coming back across the state line into the state. So you're importing it once you've exported it. So
yeah, that's one thing that a lot of our hunters need to be aware of is, when you're planning an out-of-state trip, you need to not only know the chronic wasting disease and carcass regulations that apply to the state that you're hunting in, but as well as all of the regulations that apply in the states that you're traveling through. So just keep that in mind whenever you guys are traveling about. But to answer Skylar's question, if you shoot an elk in Oklahoma or a deer in Oklahoma, you can transport it anywhere in Oklahoma in any way, shape, or form. This just pertains to deer in the Cervidae family coming from out of state.
Does anybody have any more questions? All right. Well, if nobody has any more questions, we'd like to thank you all for joining us. Big thanks to our big game biologist, Dallas Barber, our assistant chief of law enforcement, Wade Farrar, and our other ODWC personnel who have been on this call to assist us. This is the first of what will be a monthly virtual regulations course. We do not have the exact date set yet for October, but the subject matter will be concerning trout fishing in Oklahoma. So we'll be talking about stringers, creel limits, daily bags, things like that. So always check in with our website on our outdoor calendar for any and all of our upcoming virtual and in-person training. And we thank you all for coming.
I have one question if you still have time.
Yep, go for it.
So I'm a rookie into this hunting business, and I have a question about dressing the deer or turkey or whatever whenever you hunt it on spot, uh, especially for the skin and the guts. How do you guys go by doing that while on the field?
Is your specific question for how do you actually do that, or what do you do with the hide and the guts after you've removed it?
Yeah, it's actually what do you do with it after you removed it?
Okay, the state law actually says that you can dispose of any of the carcass and those carcass remains. You can either bury them, burn them, or you can dispose of them in an area that is at least a quarter mile off a public roadway, as long as that's not in a waterway, whether that be a wet waterway or a dry waterway, either way. So the way we pretty much enforce that is if you cannot see them from the road, we're not going to get our rangefinder out and check off 440 yards from the public road. As long as they can't be seen from the roadway and they're not in a creek, whether it be a wet creek or a dry creek, you're going to be okay. You do have to remember when in the case of a big game species, which turkey and deer fall into that category, those animals have to be, checked in and field tagged. So before you can completely, clean that deer, process that deer, the deer has to be checked in. Same with turkeys. So if you're a mile off from the pickup and you want to completely quarter that thing out before you move it, that's legal. Your deer just has to be checked in before you do so.
Thank you. And talking about tags, I've did read some stuff about tagging, and there is no requirement except the fact that you need to have a piece of paper, zip tied or strapped to the animal's ankle or some kind of body, parts with the name and the license number. Is that really how it works, or is there some specific tags that I need to buy from the wildlife department or some of the agents to actually be in good shape?
Yeah, immediately upon harvest, as soon as you go put hands on that thing, the first thing you have to do is attach what we call a field tag. So your name, your license number, and then the date and the time that you harvested that animal. So that has to be done before the deer is moved. Before you drag it, before you put it in the truck, before you drive off with it, that has to be done. So, and then you have 24 hours from the time you leave that hunting area to check the deer in. So you go on our e-check system, which is through our Go Out Outdoors OK app, and then you can check that deer in, and then you'll get a confirmation number, and that's when that deer has become completely legally harvested.
And just to clear up a little bit of confusion there, maybe that field tag can be anything at all. It can be a piece of paper. It can be a piece of duct tape. There isn't an official field tag that we as the department issue you. So that can be anything that you attach to that animal as long as it has that information that Wade had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I've seen business cards with that written on the back of rolled up and stuck up nostrils. I mean, people get pretty creative, I guess. Duct tape with Sharpie is what I see most of all, or most commonly anyway. And before we get completely done, if you guys got something to write with, I guess I could put it in the chat bar as well. I'll give you my cell phone number. Feel free at any point to call me, send me pictures, send me text messages. I may not always answer it, but I'll get to you as quick as I can. So if you have any clarifications, it's Wade Farrar, 918-331-5555, 918-331-5555. So call me 24/7. I may not answer 24/7, but I'll get back to you as quick as I can.
All right. One more question concerning the doe hunting and the antlers. I know there is a six deer limits with 2 antler bucks, but I know some states and some counties have kind of limitation on a 13 point, 10 point, deer hunt. How does it work mostly on the public land for the WMA or the OLAP?
There's not a statewide regulation as far as size of a buck. An antlered deer is any deer that has 3 inches of antler above the hairline. So if it's got 3 inches of horn, it's a legal antlered deer. The WMAs are going to be the same way. They're going to be separated, on their specific regulations for that area of what you can and can't harvest. Some of them are, doe harvest may be completely against the law, and others, antlered harvest may be, something you can't do. So you have to study up on that area that you're going to specifically and make sure that you're within the rules there. And if you have specific questions for that area in the regulations, there's a hunting contact which is the biologist that takes care of that area. And then the game warden contact numbers are there as well. So that's your best bit of information for those specific areas if you're planning on traveling to them.
Second question, land access permit. Give you access to the WMA or give you access to just the Oklahoma land? I forgot what it's called. The OLAP.
The land access permit is specifically for the Honobig Three Rivers area. That's an extra permit you have to hunt those areas. Everywhere else, a hunting license is going to give you access to that property, including OLAP.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm out. Appreciate it. It was very informative. Thank you.
All right. And like I said, that's my cell phone number. Call me anytime.
Thank you, sir. I probably wouldn't be at 10 p.m., but I will do so. Thank you.
I won't answer at 10 p.m. I promise.
All right, everybody. Well, if that's it, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Just as a reminder, check out our website, wildlifedepartment.com. We will have this course uploaded onto our game warden page. So if you go to our website and click on laws and regulations, this video will occur there, as well as all of our future Know the Law virtual regulation courses. And like I said, next month we'll be dealing with trout regulations. And check back with our website and go outdoorsoklahoma.com to check out our event calendar for all and any virtual or in-person training or clinic opportunities. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and sign off. And thank you all for joining us.